Hello, in today's video, I'm going to talk about something I love, and that is travel. I'm going to teach you some very important verbs. These are all verbs that we use when we're talking about travel. So, let's get started. I wanted to tell you a little bit about phrasal verbs. What is a phrasal verb? Well, when you see a verb and a preposition together, that's a phrasal verb. Let me give you an example. Here we have 4 words, and each of these is a phrasal verb. They all have the verb get in, get up, get on, get over, and there are many more like get away. There's tons of them. Each of these can actually have multiple meanings too. One of the most difficult parts about learning English is understanding phrasal verbs because the preposition, this blue part, can completely change the meaning of the verb. Prepositions are words like on, off, up, down, toward, over, away, and so on. You will notice that phrasal verbs are very, very common in conversation. In general, when people talk, they often use phrasal verbs. So they are incredibly important, especially when you're talking about going on a trip with your friends or family. So let's look at some of the common phrasal verbs we use when we are talking about trips. The first verb I want to teach you is drop off. So drop is the verb and off is the preposition. Together, drop off is a phrasal verb. What does this mean? When you drop someone off, it means you are taking them to a place and then leaving them there. For example, maybe your friend needs to go to the airport. You drive them to the airport and you drop them off at the airport. This means you take them there and then you leave them in that place. They don't come back home with you, they stay there. So, for instance, I have a friend named Frank. When Frank goes traveling, we drop Frank off at the airport. That means we drive Frank to the airport, he has all his luggage and suitcases, and then we say, "Goodbye, Frank, have a nice trip." We drop Frank off at the airport. You can also use drop off in a lot of other situations. For example, when you were a child, maybe your parents, your mom, your dad, or maybe your grandparents, dropped you off at school. This means they took you to school, and once you got there, they said goodbye and left. So, drop off means you take someone to a place and then you leave them there. Now, I have written the verb and the preposition here. You will notice that Frank, the name of a person, is in the middle of drop and off. These two are not always together. We say, we drop somebody off at the airport. Sometimes with phrasal verbs, you actually separate them. You can put the name of the person between the verb and the preposition. For other phrasal verbs, you can't do this. But for drop off, you can. You can put the name or object between the verb and the preposition. So, in this case, we say, we drop Frank off at the airport. So now let's look at another example of a common phrasal verb. See off. So again, we have off in both of these. See off is similar to drop off, but it's a little bit different. Sometimes your family or your friends are going away for a long time. Maybe they're going on a vacation or a trip. So you want to see them off. This means you want to say goodbye to them at the airport, at the train station, or maybe at their house. It's that goodbye you say before somebody leaves for their vacation or trip. For example, we see Frank off. Frank is going to Australia, so we go to the airport because we want to say goodbye to Frank. So, we see Frank off is another way to say, we say goodbye to Frank when he goes on his trip. All right, so now let's look at something similar to drop off. Notice where Frank is in the sentence. We see Frank off. Frank is between the verb and the preposition. So we see somebody off. For example, we see our mother off, we see our father off, or we see our friend off. This is how you use this phrasal verb. Now let's look at some other phrasal verbs that have to do with travel. So, our next phrasal verb is very important when we are talking about the airport. If you have ever been on an airplane, you should know this word, take off. The meaning of take off is when the airplane leaves the airport and flies away. It's the opposite of lands. So, takes off means the airplane goes up into the sky. An example of this is very simple. The plane takes off at 7 o'clock. Again, takes and off are together, so there's nothing separating them. All right, what's another important phrasal verb? We also have get in. This also has to do with the airplane. Get in is used when the plane arrives at the airport. For example, Frank's plane gets in at 9 p.m. We can also use this for a person. When you say Frank gets in at 9 p.m., it pretty much means arrives. So, Frank gets in at 9 p.m. or Frank's airplane gets in at 9 p.m. We can also use get in for trains. For example, Frank's train gets in at 9 p.m., so it means arrives. We use this phrasal verb a lot when we talk about transportation, like planes and trains. The next one, check in. Check in and check out. These are very important phrases when you stay at a hotel or a hostel. So when you check in, this means you register at the hotel. For example, if I want to stay at a hotel, I go to the hotel and there's somebody at the front desk. What do I say to them? I say, I would like to check in. Here's another example. Frank checks in. Frank checks into the hotel. This means Frank goes into the hotel and tells them, I'm here, I want a bed, I check in. Now, the opposite of this is check out. This is when you leave the hotel and pay them the money for your stay there. So maybe you go to the hotel for 5 days. When you leave the hotel and pay the money for those 5 days, that's when you check out. We can say Frank checks out. Now let's look at a couple more phrasal verbs. So our next phrasal verb is set out. So what does it mean? When you set out, it means you start. The key word here is start. You start a journey, or sometimes a road trip. It's the beginning of usually a journey or a trip. For example, imagine Frank. He's at the hotel and he wants to go on an adventure. He wants to explore. Maybe he's in Sydney, Australia, and he wants to explore Sydney. So we can say, Frank set out early to explore. This means that Frank starts his journey early. If you have ever gone on a road trip where you drove your car somewhere very far, maybe you drove your car for 3 days to go somewhere, you can say, every day we set out early, or we set out late. So this means we began our trip early, or we began our trip late. Set out means to start a journey. Our last one, and it's very important. Pick up. There are many different meanings of the phrase pick up. You can pick up the phone, you can pick something up with your hand. In this case, it's a little bit different because we are talking about travel. When we are talking about pick up here, we mean getting someone from a place and then taking them to another place. So, for example, when Frank comes home, I will pick Frank up from the airport and take him home. Usually this involves a car. Not always, but usually. You pick somebody up with your car and take them somewhere else. For example, Michelle picks Frank up in her car. So, maybe at the airport she drives to the airport, and Frank is there after his long trip to Australia. She picks him up. Not literally, she doesn't lift him up. No, with her car she takes him from the airport to his house. And that's it for today's lesson on phrasal verbs related to travel. I hope you found this video helpful. If you enjoyed this lesson, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more English learning tips, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.